Hey, this is the pastor's way more accomplished big brother.
And this is the pastor that is less accomplished than his older brother and wishes that he'd stop bringing this up.
And this is the pastor with no answers.
All right, man.
I'm not doing any more of this shit about me being smart and accomplished. I just like that. For one reason, I don't buy it. I don't agree with you. And secondly, I hate talking about myself that way. So I'm done with that.
So you're done with using my scripts?
Well, some
or
of your
I have to
scripts
adjust them?
Yeah, adjust them, exactly.
Come on, you're more accomplished than me.
Why do you say that?
You're smarter. You're valedictorian of your high school classroom. You had higher grades than me in college. I'm not saying this out of any sort of animosity.
You're boiling down success to grades? That's utterly ridiculous.
You love your wife more than I love mine. You're a better father. You do better deeds.
I do better deeds?
Well, everybody... We want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas. If you're listening to this episode relatively around the time when we put it out, it's the week of Christmas, and so we're excited about that. Jared and I are especially excited because if you're listening to this episode the week of Christmas, we are actually hanging out with each other. We only get to do that a couple times a year, so pretty jazzed about that.
Most definitely.
Yeah, but Merry Christmas, everybody. You guys, and I don't want to make an assumption that everybody that's listening to our podcast are Christians either. But Jared, don't you think that if someone's not a Christian, they still get the benefit from Christmas, right? Like, do non-Christians hate Christmas music? You can't hate Christmas music.
I think you have Christians who hate Christmas music.
That's true. But I think you don't have to be a Christian to have the Christmas spirit.
No, not
at
all.
I don't think so.
I mean, I think Christmas the way it is now is pretty secularized anyway. I mean, for the most part, and it's about getting gifts. It's about getting together with family. It's about decorating your house. So, right. I think you can be a non-Christian and enjoy all of that. So
right. Now in all fairness, I do and this may sound very pompous, but as a Christian, I do think that there seems I obviously believe that there's more depth to how I'm approaching Christmas because
for sure.
Not only do you have the shallow Christmas spirit and all that stuff and the lights and you just feel good, but you're also like, oh wow, these feel-good feelings can actually mean something, too. It's actually based on something real,
Right.
So I told you that I went to the music farm and saw Big Crit. And here's what's so crazy is he had... All right, first of all, so this shows how old Priscilla and I are because we get to a concert. Doors are open at 8. It starts at 9, and we're just assuming... Big Crit's going to be around 9 o'clock. If not, maybe one opening act for 25 minutes or so, and we're going to be home by 10:30. Yeah. Dude, they had 3 rappers. 3. And there was DJing between them. I mean, we're talking 11:15, 11:30, and he finally comes out here. Now, here's what's crazy is the 3 rappers that came out before Big Crit were so, it was almost not fair to them how good Big Crit was and how just decent those first 3 guys are. So this is, first of all, it's pretty cool because this is more of an underground rap scene. Even Big Crit and Music Farm was sold out. I mean, Big Crit had just given away a CD online, so they're doing it differently, but he still sells out a show.
Right.
But the guy before him, he's called like Chicago Kid or something like that. I mean, he's worked with Kendrick Lamar, Kanye West, and all these guys, and he sucked. Like, Big Crit comes out there and just kills it. I mean, you even go from the guy before Big Crit that I was telling about. His DJ was kind of a scrawny guy with long dreads and, kind of endearing mannerisms. But then when Big Crit comes out, you have the big DJ that's ball-headed and the big headphones that just bobs his head. You're like, okay, everything.
So his look demands, street credibility.
Oh, my gosh.
Right there.
Oh, yeah.
So my question to you is, so when you say that a rapper sucks, now you know rap way better than I do. I appreciate hip-hop, but when you say that the rapper sucks, does that mean stage presence? Does that mean beats? Does it mean flow? What are you exactly meaning by that?
See, I think to be a good rapper, you have to have all the above. Like the very first act, he had a good flow and he had good stage presence, but the music was so boring and stupid and just like, don't even get on stage if you don't have a really good music. I hate saying I'm coming across way too mean, but that's and then the second guy, great mannerisms, great approach, music same thing. And then I would say the guy right before Big Crit, I didn't even like his like he had decent music, but it just was not as cool. And I mean, Big Crit, he's got like the Southern charm and just he knows how to perform. It's like a good performer. Here's how you know a good performer, where you're looking at him, you're like, I like this guy. Like right. I may not even agree with what he's saying. I just like him. And it's funny too. It reminds me, some of the things that he was doing as a hip hop guy reminds me of what Toby does on stage at like an emo core show. It's like you look eye to eye with the crowd. You have a smile on your face, like, hey, I like you. And we all know Toby does not like those people.
He's a good actor.
Right? So. All right, well, I'll tell you what, let's join with our guests. We're going to be talking about Christian passivism today, and just hey, is there can we be Christians and just be completely 100% anti-violent, anti-war, and I don't know what that looks like. Does that mean we just never defend ourselves or something? I know if somebody steps up to my family, I'm going to have to do something. You know what I'm saying? So, we'll get started here in a second. We have Jack Hoey and Preston Sprinkle with us. I'll give a quick introduction and let these guys speak for themselves. But Jack has been a boss, a mentor, someone that I can go to and ask questions. I've learned a lot from him in the past 2 or 3 years, and super smart too. Jared, I think for the first time in a while, you're not the smartest person on the call. Actually, you may be the third smartest because Preston's pretty smart too.
I can take that. I can take it with that.
Jared, seriously, just like, will you please knock off the smart stuff?
Yeah, I'm sick of it. It's so untrue.
And then Preston is a theologian. I think you teach it too, right, Preston?
I teach it. Yeah, I got my teach on.
Teach it. Yep. Writes books. Recently wrote, what's the name of the book? I was telling Jared and Jack about it. I actually read the whole thing, but I don't want to botch the name.
Actually, People to Be Loved, Why Homosexuality is Not Just an Issue.
Cool. And he helped Francis Chan write Erasing Hell, and he's become a friend. So happy to have these guys on here. Jack, what's it like trying to keep me reined in?
How much time do we have?
So, Jack, bringing you in on this call, you mentioned that you have a interesting work background that kind of pertains to this topic a little bit.
Yeah, I was asking Joey when he asked me if I wanted to participate in this. I said, "Are my 4 years of working in a nuclear weapons plant relevant?"
Yeah.
I worked with a large company for a while and spent a few years. Was transferred to a plant where it was part of the nuclear weapons complex.
Yeah.
Back in the 1980s.
Yeah. So Jack helped our country be at a place to where we can obliterate other countries.
America.
All right. So we're gonna get everybody warmed up and loose. Remember the vision for this podcast is just some dudes hanging out, talking, not trying to win a debate or sound super smart, although most people end up sounding smart on here, except for me. I kind of end up feeling left out. But I'm going to ask some serious questions. We're going to take a serious tone. So we're going to slow down. We're going to be serious. And I'm going to ask you guys some questions to reflect on. I want y'all to do some deep thought. First question, I'm going to ask you, Jared, if one sports team had to be sent on the front line of a major war confrontation, what sports team would you send?
And we're talking this year.
It could be any team in history.
I'm going to say the LA Lakers.
Jared, they're probably going to die. The LA Lakers? The Magic Johnson, Kareem
No,
team?
you just said just in general, what franchise? Right? What team?
Okay, so the whole franchise. Wilt Chamberlain, Elgin Baylor.
And I'm a Boston
Kobe
Celtics
Bryant.
fan, so yeah.
even Kurt Rambis and wow,
Let's come back to Minneapolis.
AC Green.
That's a bunch of guys, man. I'm gonna send the 2014 Seattle Seahawks, man. I can't get over that NFC Championship game. I never will. So it won't bother me to see Russell Wilson have to fight for our country on the front lines. It just wouldn't. How about you, Preston? What team would you send?
Well, kind of like Jared's answer. I mean, Wilt Chamberlain, wasn't he in the old Conan the Barbarian movies? I mean, that guy was legit.
That's true.
Jack, you got a team, Mr. Steelers fan?
Well, yeah. I mean, historically, it would be the Oakland Raiders. I'm not sure if there's I need to think about if there's a more contemporary example.
All right. Second question. It's a very simple question, but I want us to really think about it. Preston, I'll ask you first. Was Harry S. Truman a pacifist?
Harry S. Truman? I don't think so, man.
Jared, do you think he was? Do you think he wanted to make that decision?
Do I think he wanted to be the first person to drop the atomic bombs? No.
So, I mean, he would classify as the complete opposite of a pacifist, I would say. All right. If people still had draws, like back in the day, you stand back to back and you walk, and I don't know how it works. You just tell them to draw now, and then you try to shoot each other. Who would win in a draw, Jared? Trump or Clinton? And Hillary? Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump? Who would win in a draw?
Well, you're saying Hillary, Bill, and Donald Trump?
No. Just Hillary or Donald Trump.
Boy. I got to say Hillary.
Yeah.
I think she could probably move fast, right?
Yeah, I think so.
It doesn't look like Donald Trump can turn around that quickly.
And he's a bigger target.
Yeah, he's a bigger target for sure. For sure. All right, last question. What would be easier, Jack, to make Yosemite Sam a pacifist? And for those of you new school ballers, Yosemite Sam was one of the most violent men on the face of the earth. He had a long red beard, and he was always shooting guns. It just did not matter. And he was a cartoon character. So make Yosemite Sam a pacifist or convince Mother Teresa to carry.
How do you know she didn't?
How do you know she didn't?
The streets of Calcutta.
That's true. You never know, old Mother Teresa. All right. Well, let's get into this. I'm actually pretty intrigued by this topic. All right. So I did a tiny bit of research going into this. Again, my aim is not to be an expert on a topic before talking about it. Got a different, or I would say a clearer term that I want to be using here, and I mean, obviously you guys beg to differ or set me straight, but I found the term absolute pacifist. And so what I read about that, this is someone who refuses to kill whatever the circumstances. So this is, I'm not going to defend myself. I'm not going to defend other people. I'm not going to do anything violent. So we're not talking about people that don't like war and wish that we could avoid them. There's actually room for them in the pacifism discussion. There's a terminology for those people that don't like war. But what we're talking about right now are people that feel morally obligated to avoid all levels of violence. And typically this show, we're talking about this from a biblical Christian perspective, the four of us being Christians looking at it through that lens. So what I see in the Bible, I see the Old Testament, lots of wars that basically God said, hey, you need to fight these wars. So whether war was necessary or war just was the best way of getting things carried out, there was war. Then Jesus apparently came and brought about a new kingdom of turning the other cheek, loving your enemy, and basically saying, hey, you know what? We need to show people that I'm the truth, I am love, and all that sort of thing. So definitely in Jesus' kingdom, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of violence, at least in the church age. And yet, I think when he returns, he's going to destroy a lot of people, and it seems like that church age Jesus vision for us carrying out our faith will be drastically changed. So anyway, those are just some a quick snapshot of how I'm looking at all this. But let's go around and Jared, with what I explained as far as an absolute pacifist, are you one, and why or why not?
No, I'm not an absolute pacifist.
Okay.
At the same time, I'm not a warmonger. Like I hate war. Right. I think the war should be a last resort. But I do think that God puts us as the stewards in certain places, and it's our duty to protect those who God placed as our responsibility.
Okay. Simple enough. Like it. Jack, are you an absolute pacifist?
No. In fact, I would really probably affirm what Jared said in a lot of ways. War is always an evil, but it may not be the worst evil. And, I think if you're going to take the tack of, or the approach of saying, I'm an absolute pacifist because I believe that's what the Scripture teaches, there are certainly passages that you can point to. But this issue of responsibility enters in. And, again, like whether you're talking about protecting your child or something like that, or whether you translate that into a community or into a responsibility as a leader of a nation, it's hard for me to see how an absolute pacifist could fulfill certain responsibilities.
Yeah. You want to give an example?
Well, again, Jesus says, do not resist an evil person. You see a known pedophile walking down the street with your small child. Is that okay? I mean, do you allow that to happen, or do you only try to talk the person out of it?
Right.
I mean, or do you do whatever it takes to protect your child?
Right.
And that's seems like a crazy example, but that's not completely unrealistic. And I think if you relate that to responsibilities for a community, would you say that it's wrong for a community to have a police force?
Yeah.
Would you say that it's wrong for a nation to defend its citizens?
Right.
It's interesting. One of the things that, if you look at American history, one of the things you could ask is, why didn't the Quakers become the dominant religious group in North America? They were the dominant sect in Pennsylvania, certainly. They were the founders of Pennsylvania, which was the largest and most powerful of the colonies.
Right.
Philadelphia was the largest city in North America. Why not? And really the answer is, during the French and Indian War, what we call the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War,
right.
The French were allies with a lot of the Indian tribes around the English settlements. They incited the Indians to the Indian tribes to start attacking and massacring settlers.
Right.
And so this started to happen in Pennsylvania, and the Quakers, who were basically the leaders of the colony, were kind of paralyzed.
Yeah.
They didn't know what to do. And ultimately, they didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And, that was the end.
Yeah.
Basically what they showed was, in the minds of the people that they were leading, that they weren't willing to bear the responsibilities of leadership.
Yeah.
Now, you could argue that, okay, but that's still the principal Christian position. I don't happen to agree with that, but you
Right.
could make that argument. But if that's the case, then you'd have to say that Christians then can't be in those positions of responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously, Preston, you're going to get your chance here. But what you said, Jack, makes me think, too, a huge debate is the refugee situation, and should we just be inviting, open door for refugees, and we're not even going to get into that. But bottom line is, it seems like a lot of people who would say yes, 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 yes to the refugees would also say, a lot of them would probably be like, no to war. And if it wasn't for some of the biggest wars in the history of our country, we wouldn't have a place to welcome them. I mean, we would be under Nazi Germany or taken over by communism. I don't think we would even be talking about whether or not refugees could come, because we wouldn't have a place that people wanted to come. So it seems like there is a cost to having the country that we have. And I do want to kind of but after Preston gives us where he's at, I would like to know too, are we talking about two different things? Like, as far as, can a Christian say, yeah, I don't believe in violence in my personal life, but a government is supposed to function differently. A government is supposed to protect their citizens, so they can take different means that I probably shouldn't take as a law-abiding citizen. But Preston, where are you coming from with all this?
Yeah.
Are you an absolute pacifist?
Well, I don't love that phrase for several reasons.
Well, you know what? You can deal. You can deal with it.
I can deal with it.
No, tell us why.
Yeah,
Tell us why you don't like
the
it.
term pacifism, I don't use the term to refer to myself. I prefer the term, the phrase Christian nonviolence is the phrase I would use. The term pacifism gives the impression that I just am sitting around with my arms righteously folded behind my back and I'm watching evil run rampant. I'm not doing anything about it. In fact, the way you guys kind of describe absolute pacifism is very much that. It's you're not going to do anything to help the innocent. You're not going to do anything to defend yourself. The position I would advocate for is, I would say that the New Testament doesn't sanction nor allow the use of violence for the defense of the innocent, to fight against evil, or to defend oneself. There's just I don't see any New Testament evidence for that. Even though there was innocent people in the first century, there was violence in the first century. I mean, these categories existed. These aren't categories foreign to the New Testament, and yet Jesus very radically, very counterculturally chose not only a nonviolent path, but the New Testament writers drew upon Jesus' nonviolent path as a model for Christians to follow. So if we wander into politics and history and, of course, what do you do when a guy breaks into your house and wants to rape your family and all, these are the typical scenarios that people go. My focus really is primarily, it's not political nor even necessarily practical. It's primarily theological and ethical. And I think that's where this discussion should begin and linger for a moment. I think that whenever I don't think there's a single conversation I've had about this topic where we spend about 30 seconds in the Bible and then we race to these scenarios or war or what about this, that, and it's like, why,
how do you not? How do you not?
Well, because I'm a Christian and I believe in Jesus, and I think that we should at least do him some honor. I mean, if he's even a lowercase LR Lord, I mean, we should at least say, hey, man, you actually said some things about this that were pretty radical, and I take what he says seriously when he talks about sexual morality. I take what he says seriously about the poor, and he not only said a lot of things about violence, but modeled some really, really radical things. There's some really crazy statements in the New Testament, and either they stem from our Creator or they don't. And so I mean, that's in this discussion. I mean, wherever we go with it, I'm going to kind of keep going back to the Bible and saying, let's really look at this. And
I'm sure you're used to kind of being the minority in defending this. I would imagine there's not too many people that are as radical as you. You know what? One thing Jack said, and then you said about Jesus, and I'll just throw this out there, and I want to hear something Jack has to say here, is so Jesus is, let the children come to me. Let the children come to me. I mean, we see those pictures of the kids on his lap and all that stuff. Could we imagine Jesus being in that same setting and someone who's a known sex offender grabbing one of those kids and starting to run off? Would Jesus run after him and say, stop? Or, obviously Jesus could turn the guy into a pillar of salt if he wanted to. But I mean, if it came down to it, would he eventually use force? Preston, I totally know you get these scenarios all the time. You're probably sick of them, but for someone like me, I guess maybe who's a little more simple-minded, I don't see how we can avoid, those sorts of, hey, if a guy comes into your house and says, I'm going to kill your wife and kids, what would you do, sort of thing. So, Jack, what were you going to say?
Well, first of all, I'm going to preface this by saying, Preston, I'm really, I've been looking forward to the conversation and looking forward to hearing you, kind of lay out your thinking and how you think about this theologically, because I agree with you. That's the foundation that we need to build on. And so I'm going to say this, and it's not applied to you. It's a general statement, but obviously one of the challenges that we have coming to Scripture is, you look at a statement that says something, and then the question is, how do I interpret that? Do I interpret that absolutely literally? Is that an injunction for all time and in all situations, or isn't it? Are there limits? And of course, one of the ways that you determine that is you use Scripture to interpret Scripture. And I'm not instructing you, obviously, as I'm saying this. I'm just kind of expressing the way that I look at this question. So, Jesus' thing about don't resist an evil person, what does he mean there? I have my interpretation, and I guess part of it is informed by what Paul says in Romans 12. He says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And then the next thing he says is do not retaliate, which I think is the essence of what Jesus is getting at in his comment. And, Paul's saying, if it is possible, acknowledging that it's not always going to be possible, as far as it depends on you, acknowledging that in any relationship, everything doesn't depend on you, that the other person has a role that you, in some ways, have to respond to. And with those two caveats, you're to live at peace with everyone.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never read that verse with thinking physical, like, war or confrontation. I've always thought about it like if you're mad at somebody and you need to talk to them. Hey, I'm sorry I said that. That's interesting. Preston?
Yo. I appreciate your perspective and what was I'm responding to a specific question. I totally forgot what it was right now.
No. Believe me, that's happened to me a billion times. But basically, as far as, Paul said, hey, as far as it depends on you, be at peace, with everyone. I think so. Jack, would you say that, okay, sure, that's the approach that we should take, but too bad it's just not practical. It's not.
Well, here's one thing I would just say. First of all, everything Jesus taught and everything he commanded is practical and is doable. I don't believe that Jesus told us to do anything that we can't do.
Yeah.
He wouldn't command us to do something impossible. But, I think sometimes we can look at some of his statements, we take them in isolation, and we apply them in ways that I think go beyond the bounds of what he was intending when he said whatever it was he said.
Right.
I think in the do not resist an evil person, what he's specifically talking about in my mind is the cycle of retaliation.
Yeah.
That violence begets violence, and if you don't break the cycle, it never ends.
Yeah.
And somebody has to take the initiative to do that. And he's saying, followers of mine, I want you to be people who take the initiative to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually know what I was going to say now. I agree with you. I think that's a great point. And I may be a different sort of advocate for nonviolence. I don't think that I or anybody in my quote-unquote camp can point to like one verse and say that this kind of settles it. I see people quoting the turn the other cheek passage in Matthew 5 or other texts, and they kind of say, therefore, we should be nonviolent. I don't agree with that at all. I mean, my case for Christian nonviolence is really built on many different cumulative pieces of evidence, both from the direct teaching of Christ, the life of Christ that he models, and how other New Testament writers draw upon the life of Christ, his nonviolent journey to the cross as a model for believers to follow, how other New Testament writers look at the question, how even in the early church, or first few hundred years, how the first theologians of the church viewed violence. So I definitely don't want to look at one verse here and there and say this kind of settles it, but I still would say that cumulatively that there's a very least very strong case to be made that while Christians should defend the innocent and protect children and stop pedophiles from doing this and that and all the stuff that we should do, that violence is not the best nor Christian means of doing so. And I think that's the question. It's not a question of whether or not we should fight against evil. The question has to do with the most effective Christian means of fighting against evil. I think that's an important caveat.
Well, no, that's an interesting way to frame it, Preston, because, I don't know if how much you've read of Reinhold Niebuhr, but, he makes the distinction between non-resistance, which is what his argument is that Christ is teaching, and nonviolent resistance. And his point is that those are two different things, and nonviolent resistance is a tactic. It is not a ethical principle. So I'm curious, how would you respond to that distinction?
Yeah, I think it could be helpful. I think that the passage in Matthew 5 that you've been quoting, I mean, the Greek word, don't resist evil, the word translated "don't resist," it does have violent kind of revolutionary connotations, meaning, in fact, N.T. Wright translates it, "Don't violently resist evil." Don't be a revolutionary is kind of the point there. There was another guy, Walter Wink, more recently after Niebuhr. He was a big advocate for non-violent attempts at resistance, and I think he carried on the distinction you were making. Yeah, I don't know. I think it can be a helpful distinction. I think at the end of the day, it doesn't. In my mind, it doesn't greatly alter the discussion too much, though. But
well, the only thing that I would say, and again, Preston, I hope this comes. I'm exploring this with you, and I don't pretend to know the answers, but see. It seems to me that you're saying that the principle of nonviolence is more than a tactic; that it's an ethical imperative. But that's what I'm struggling to see. Well, in other words, and so like the example that Niebuhr uses is Gandhi and Gandhi's approach. And he has this fascinating aside, and this was written in 1932.
Yeah.
This fascinating aside saying, basically, if African Americans are ever going to achieve a measure of justice in American society, this is what they're going to have to do, because there aren't enough of them to revolt. But his argument throughout the book is, violent resistance is sometimes justified, and you choose nonviolence when you think it's going to serve your turn, and that arguing that there is a moral difference between those two is, his argument would be, that's, you're arguing about a tactic, not a moral imperative.
Yeah, so I wouldn't, I think we need to look at not what is the most effective, but what is the most faithful. And I think that was, Yoder made that distinction. I thought it was really helpful. I mean, we often think, what is the most effective means at fighting against evil? And I think that that's not a bad question to ask, but I think we need to first ask, what is the most faithful? I mean, we could look, humanly speaking, Jesus was a very ineffective leader. He got crucified. I mean, he lost, but, any Christian martyr, you can look at any martyr and say, well, it didn't work. He got killed. He didn't save his own life. And yet you look at, for instance, through the book of Revelation, and Revelation says that when a Christian is martyred, when he suffers, he actually is conquering evil. Like, there is actually more power in the suffering of Christian martyrs than there is in any sort of, drone attack we can use against evil. And that's...
Yeah, I hear you.
I think we need to step back and look at, as Christians, we're trying to extend the kingdom of God. We're trying to fight against evil. And yet, as you know, the evil we're fighting against is not flesh and blood. So, I think we have to step back and say, through a kingdom lens, you can't fight, a non-flesh and blood enemy by using flesh and blood demons.
What if they're flesh and blood and they're demon possessed, and the only way you can get to the demon is by getting to the?
Then you pull out the big guns and you just.
Jared, let me ask you this. So you're a school teacher.
Okay.
You're in the cafeteria, and y'all are gonna be like, oh yeah, here's some low hanging fruit. You're in Sandy Hook cafeteria.
Okay.
All right, and basically the guy pulls out a gun. He's on the other side of the cafeteria, and he just starts shooting kids. And I know, Jared, that you don't carry, but let's say you're carrying a gun, and you've got a choice. You can either run towards this guy and basically, I'd say probably get shot, and then after that, a lot more kids are going to get shot. Or you can duck behind a table, take your gun out, and have a aim. Do you shoot him? Do you shoot him in the head? Do you shoot him in the knees? Do you not use your gun? Like, Jared Svensson, what do you do in this situation?
Shoot to kill.
And why is that not anti-Bible?
Maybe it is.
Why
and then I repent afterwards. I mean, the way I see it is, if I rush him, I'm dead. My kids have no father. my wife has no husband, and more kids get blown away. If I try to take this guy out...
Okay, well, see...
Good.
So here's how I see this. Like, I don't necessarily... And Preston, I'll be honest, like, your approach really does stretch me, and I think that this conversation is so needed because, I mean, I definitely grew up in the South, very conservative. I had Jared and I had a grandfather that carried a gun, and just definitely lived by justice and don't let the bad guys win sort of thing. And I have changed a lot since then, and I think, I mean, there is a lot of validity to what you're saying, and I even think there's a part of me that's just like, man, what if Preston's right? Like, what if we're never supposed to have any? And I was like, gosh, that would really suck. But like Jared, I would say in that situation, here's where I'm at right now is I would say I don't even know if I need to ask God to forgive me. And here's why. It seems like the most important thing that we're supposed to do in this world is to love. That's the greatest commandment, is to love God and love others. And it seems like the most loving thing to do in that situation is to protect as many people as you possibly can. So you can either arguably protect the shooter by not killing him, or protect hundreds of innocent, kindergarten, first grade, second. And I know I definitely am not trying to make this. I know it sounds like it, and maybe I unintentionally making it this huge emotional thing. Nope. I'm not trying to make Preston seem like a bad guy or anything. I'm just saying it seems like the most loving thing to do is, hey, I'm going to protect as many of these kids as I possibly can.
I totally agree with what you said. Yeah. Well put.
What I would say is, kind of two things, Joey. First of all, I think you're exactly right that, so how do you apply these difficult, what if you're in a difficult situation where it seems like the right thing, that two, totally different things could be the right approach?
Yeah.
One criteria is you go back to love. What's the loving thing to do? I mean, I think that's the right kind of question to ask. I think the second one, which maybe gets at your grandfather's example, is the aspect of humility. Shoot the bad guys. You got to be careful not to make the assumption that you can always tell.
Right.
I mean, I think that's one of the fundamental issues that people who maybe revert to violence more easily than we would think is consistent with, Jesus' teaching. One of the things that they're missing is the assumption that they know.
Right.
So I've wrestled with that scenario before, but again, I would still preface the whole scenario with, can we agree that even though injustice and evil were rampant in the first century, there's not a single verse in the New Testament that commands or allows believers to use violence to confront evil or defend the innocent? Like, we need to, it's hard for us to even wrestle with these kind of fictitious scenarios.
Well, let me challenge that.
Yeah.
Let me challenge that. And I'm about to probably get chewed up and spit out because, Preston, you know the Bible a billion times. So you're probably going to laugh and be like, Joey, that's not what it means at all. So here's the verse, here's the passage that how I read it. It sounds like this would be to the contrary. So it's Romans 13. So, submit to the government and all that stuff. But here's what's key is it says, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. And then, this is where it gets crazy. Do you want to be free from the fear of the one in authority? Then do what's right, and you'll be commended. For the one who's in authority is God's servant for your good. So this is a good thing, but here we go. But if you do wrong, be afraid. Rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They're God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. So it just seems like, could this apply to war? Another country is doing terror. Maybe not. But it seems like those are the bad guys, and it seems like. But I wouldn't necessarily make that application because I know a lot of other countries think that U.S. is the bad guys. And you know what? The U.S. has a lot of bad guys. But in this situation, I would definitely think that applies to a guy that's trying to kill my kids. And if I call the cops, if I don't have a gun, the cops come, shoot shoot the person, or if I have a gun and I mean, why is this verse not a teaching of violence?
I do have some other thoughts on your scenario. Do you want to do Romans 13 first and then get to the scenario again?
Yep.
Okay. So,
yep. Go back to the scenario and then let's go to Romans 13.
Well, I guess here's the one problem with those scenarios, and I said I probably wrongly used the term fictitious scenario as if these things don't happen. I mean, as we know, as of very recently, these things do happen. But, it is interesting as an advocate for nonviolence. I'm always kind of cornered into answering these questions with these scenarios. But the problem is I never get to participate in creating the scenario. So, so my question is, in your scenario, does God exist?
So in the scenario of Jared and Sandy Hook?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, does this God that you say exists, does he answer prayer?
Yes.
So that is an option that we have. It's not like either you kill or they kill. Like there is another option. Do you believe that, prayer has the power? Do we have evidence in the Bible that people prayed and evil was actually stopped? I mean, the answer is yes. We see, Sennacherib, 185,000 dead. And do you have a gun in your hand when the person enters the school? Okay, so I'm there. I'm the teacher. I'm packing. It's loaded, which raises questions about a loaded gun with a teacher. But I obviously have a gun because that's part of the scenario. Am I a good shot?
Yes, you're a marksman, sniper. You're like the guy on that. On the movie. Because
if I'm not a really good shot, I mean, there's a good chance that I could try to kill the guy and kill a bunch of innocent people in the process. If I'm a good shot, could I shoot the gun out of his hand? Am I that good of a shot?
Yeah, but who's going to be this rational in the heat of the moment? I mean, for me, it's 100% instinct.
No, but well, that's also I don't know if I trust. I'm a pretty good shot. I own guns. I hunt. I target shoot, and in the heat of the moment, I mean, I know Navy SEAL snipers that say, man, it takes thousands of hours of practice to really get a good shot in the heat of the moment with your blood, boiling or whatever. I mean, it's not like either you kill him or he kills a bunch of kids. Like there's all sorts of, in real life, there's all sorts of things that could happen, that could go wrong. There's other possibilities, other effective possibilities that you could pursue to take care of the guy. So, I don't. This is why I don't think those scenarios are helpful. I think that they are often created without kind of real possibilities in view. Sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
No, I would say you sound like Barack Obama justifying leading from behind while tens of thousands of Syrians die. I mean, and I don't mean that to be as harsh as it sounds, but I mean, the challenge is, though, you've got to act in the moment. And I understand the issue of, is there a God? Does he answer prayer? Yes. But I sometimes, like my analogy would be, you talk to young people and, hey, what are you going to do with your life? Well, I'm waiting for God to open a door. And it's like, where does God say that passivity is what you're supposed to do? I read the Bible saying, to him who knocks, the door will be opened. And so, I mean, Preston, I guess I would challenge your objection there by saying, boy, you can't be sure, and yet your basic premise is, in the moment, you've got to act in an instant. And I don't know. I guess where I'm going with this, though, is a little different place, and to get away from an example that just zeroes in on the non-resistance or nonviolent resistance issue. I mean, I guess one of the things that I think about too is, look at two Old Testament examples, Jeremiah and Nehemiah. Jeremiah was called to stand outside a corrupt system and denounce it. Didn't have any followers. Hard to argue from an earthly point of view that he was successful, but he was faithful and God commended him. And, X thousand years later, we remember who Jeremiah was. Nehemiah bore responsibility within a corrupt system. Was he doing God's work as well? I mean, I think so. And I guess the way that I relate that is, when I worked in the nuclear weapons plant, ironically, I was living in Boulder, Colorado, which is, as politically liberal a place as there is in the country, and I attended a church with people who used to go protest at the plant where I worked. It was interesting. I mean, I feel like we learned a lot from each other, and one of the things that I think about, is the possibility that I was wrong in what I did. Sure, that's possible, and it's possible that the things we're talking about tonight, Preston, that I'm really mistaken in some of the things I believe, and I just offer that with all humility. I mean, I don't pretend to say that my answers I think are definitive by any stretch, but I guess one of the things that I wrestle with sometimes is it possible that God can call Christians to very different places?
As far as what they believe?
Well, yeah, and again, the implications of what they believe
right.
and what they do with their lives.
Right.
Is it possible that God would call some Christians to be, I don't know if absolute pacifist is the term that you want to use, and who advocate with all their hearts for that, while
right.
he maybe calls others to be soldiers?
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely thought that about the mystery of salvation. I mean, it seems like there's such smart people that are just staunch Calvinists, and there's smart people that are staunch free will, and I'm like, they're both using Scripture. Like, maybe they're all right, but our human minds can't grasp, just how everything fits together. So, Preston, let's look at Romans 13. Why is that not a challenge to your point of view?
Yeah, I don't think it is at all. Romans 13 says that God can and does use secular governments to punish evil. That's the basic gist of it. They bear the sword and so on. What's important to understand, a couple things. Number one, Romans 13 is steeped in this prophetic tradition of God using secular nations in the Old Testament to punish evil. In fact, the phrase "servant of the Lord," which we see in Romans 13, he is God's servant to punish evil. We see that in the Old Testament, where the prophets Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, they talk about like God using Assyria or Babylon to punish evildoers. In that context, it's talking about the evildoers within Israel. That doesn't mean that God is rubber stamping all the practices and means by which Assyria and Babylon does this. It just means that God is so sovereign that he can use secular nations to do his will. And so the language of Romans 13 is really steeped in that sort of prophetic theme of God using secular nations. What's important to understand, though, is that Romans 13 comes after Romans 12, and I know that's a brilliant observation, but
your numbers, man.
Think of in Romans 12:19, Paul commands the church. Notice in Romans 13, there's no command to the church. The only command to the church is submit to your government. There's no command to the church, if there's evil, make sure you take up the sword and kill evil. The commands given to the church come in Romans 12, and in Romans 12:19, he says, do not take vengeance against evil, but leave it to the wrath of God. Connect that to Romans 13:4, where he says, vengeance is mine. Or sorry, in Romans 12:19, vengeance is mine, I will repay. Romans 13:4 goes on to talk about how God does that. So in other words, what God does in Romans 13:4 is explicitly forbidden from the church to do in Romans 12:19. So whatever's going on in Romans 13, it is not, absolutely not something given for Christians to do.
Yeah, real quick before Jack says something, I'm looking at Romans 12 right now, and mine stops at verse 18. I don't see verse 19. All right, go ahead, Jack.
Well, no, I would just say, Preston, I think your point's well taken, but he's not talking about violence. He's talking about vengeance.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I think there's definitely a distinction to be made between retaliation, vengeance, and defending yourself and defending the innocent.
Well, let me, just to maybe clarify, I was just responding to the question that we can use Romans 13 in this case. So, I agree that that's what's in the context, but either way, I don't think it applies to the situation that you were drawn into.
So, Preston, theologically, what separates Christ, his admonitions to the church, and the nation of Israel, doing conquest to take over the Holy Land, the Promised Land?
That's a really good question. So, the Old Testament's tough, and I'm not trying to get around it. In my in my book on nonviolence, I spend 4 chapters just on the Old Testament because there's no quick way to kind of summarize it.
What's your book called? So everybody can check it out if they want.
Fight a Christian Case for Nonviolence.
Gotcha.
I think either way, every Christian has a problem to, how do I put it? Every Christian, no matter what your view on violence is, has to wrestle with the Old Testament, because the Old Testament doesn't just say, yeah, if somebody's harming your family, go ahead and kill them. It's like, go slaughter an entire people group, including women and children. So, I mean, we can't just cite Joshua and say, therefore, I can kill the bad guys. Like, whoa, there's any Christian should recognize there's some tensions and problems with the violence in the Old Testament. Now, I'm trying to be concise here. There's a lot of ethical issues in the Old Testament that we have to wrestle with. Slavery, the view of women, polygamy, and others. What we see, though, is what some theologians call God sort of meets Israel where they're at, but then he slowly moves them towards where he wants them to be. So, again, in my book, I show that if you look at the Old Testament as a whole, you see early on God meeting Israel where they're at. They're living in a very violent society, and sometimes he sanctions that. But throughout the Old Testament, we see God moving them further and further and further away from violence, so that even in the Hebrew Bible, you have books like 1st and 2nd Chronicles that you do see this progression. I mean, in Isaiah, Amos, Chronicles, and other books that are written in the latter part of the Old Testament, where you see God headed towards a more nonviolent way of furthering his kingdom, so that when Jesus comes on the scene, he's sort of the climax of this movement away from violence. But again, that's, you have to kind of take my word.
But it seems to me what they had to do was defeat people who are their enemies. I mean, so you could say that was just them and their time, but to take over lands, you have to conquer the people.
Sure, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, obviously that's all there, but that doesn't mean that doesn't in and of itself mean that Christians can therefore use violence to further the kingdom of God. I mean, there is a lot of continuity. There's also a lot of discontinuity between the ethics of the Old Testament and the ethics of the New. So, there's no question that God allowed and even sanctioned the use of violence in the Old Testament. And this is where I would depart from some of my Mennonite brothers and sisters who, they kind of said I took the Old Testament too seriously. I'm like, no, I mean, how do you, God said kill everything that breathes, like that. There's no way around that. But that doesn't in and of itself mean that therefore Christians under a New Kingdom ethic that applies to them. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that's commanded in the Old Testament that doesn't apply to Christians, like don't eat pork and, observe the Sabbath, meaning Saturday. And, there's a lot of things that were
Sure.
moral issues in the Old Testament that Christians aren't to uphold. So the question is violence one of those issues that was allowed for Israel under a theocracy, but not allowed for Christians? And I would say, yes, it is one of those issues. Is that making sense? I feel like I'm
sense.
kind of okay.
Yeah.
You don't have to agree with it. I just want to make sure.
It makes sense. Totally.
Jack?
Preston, I agree with the way that, and I think you framed very well the tension between, how do you understand Old Testament writings, and not all of them are teachings. I mean, the fact that something was recorded as history without comment, as a lot of the historical books in the Bible are, does not mean that God is endorsing what happened necessarily.
Right, yeah, totally,
And,
that's a good point.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're going to wrap this up here. One other thing I wanted to bring up is what do you guys think about Christians celebrating military victories, such as, praise God, Iraq is fallen, or God bless America, we found Osama, worship the Lord this morning, just things like that, as far as, okay, someone just got shot, or however Osama bin Laden died. He's dead. Sure, he's an evil person. He did a lot of messed up stuff to America. Do Christians celebrate that?
Let me do an extreme example. So let's say let's say that we live in 1945 and Hitler was just defeated and the Holocaust has ended. Shouldn't I, as a Christian, thank God this over? To me, that seems entirely
the Holocaust.
To me, that seems entirely justified.
Well, but what I hear Joey saying is more of the, is it okay to rejoice as a patriot? My nation won is kind of what I hear you saying more.
I think what right? Yeah, I think what I'm getting at is just the fact that, like, should there be a place, though, where Christians say, okay, but Hitler, like in Jared's situation, it's a real person. So I think taking what Jared said and then adding what I'm saying, I think maybe a balanced way of responding is, yes, praise God, the Holocaust is over. We stopped Hitler, but then maybe some mourning of, man, that's a real human being that was so lost, so off the path, thought that it was okay to kill millions of Jews, and now he's dead, and who knows if he's, looks like he's probably separated from God forever and ever and ever. But instead, like with the recent wars that we've been in, it just seems like a lot of Christians are just, yay, we won. And it's like, wait a second, these are human beings we're talking about here.
So I'll just respond quickly. I mean, I think you've put your finger on a real issue. I think that, one of the challenges with American culture is we're kind of indoctrinated to think that if we feel something strongly, then it's legitimate.
Yeah.
And patriotism is this enormously powerful impulse, and it operates at a very deep level, and it's natural to have a strong patriotic impulse. And in a case of a difficult war being over, like that we won, that's a good thing, but it's corrupting.
Yeah,
it's very easy to be part of a dominant group and not see the injustice that you're inflicting on others. And I think that that's always a danger point, whether it's you're a member of a powerful country or you're a member of a powerful group within a society or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's one of the things that, in terms of growing in maturity as a believer, your self-awareness in terms of those situations should grow.
Yeah. Preston, what do you think about that stuff?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's just recognizing the complexity of the very question is important. I mean, even God doesn't rejoice over the death of the wicked, and yet there is justice that happens when God does destroy the wicked. And so I don't, I think we mourn the entire intricate web of evil that produces somebody like Hitler and all the innocent people that he slaughtered, and yet still, in one sense, when that is ended, I'm very happy with the end of the evil, and yet I don't necessarily rejoice over the means of the end, or even how it ended, or even the person, like you said, Hitler was created in God's image, and I mourn the fact that somebody so potentially beautiful could become so wicked and evil, and I mourn that whole scenario. So yeah, I don't, just to say, I rejoice, we won. It's like, well, it's one thing for American Christians to say that, but I mean, is that how every Christian in every country is supposed to, Christians in North Korea, do they rejoice if North Korea wins their enemy, which is us? I mean, I don't, whatever we say about Christians living in exile, by the way, in America, it should also apply for other Christians living in exile in whatever nation state they're living under.
Yeah, Jared, that was a good example, because I do imagine myself living back in that time and be like, man, thank goodness that's over, and evil guy is no longer a threat. Well, thanks everybody for this conversation. Also, Preston, hearing all these scenarios that you've heard a billion times. I just got a text from a guy. He took a picture of himself and he has a ski mask, and he said that he's inside my house and that he's going to kill my family in 33 minutes.
Turn the other cheek.
And that there's a gun on the front porch that I could use, and so I'm going to rush home. It takes me about 30 minutes. And all right, well, Preston, Jack, thank y'all so much. This really was one of the most fun conversations we've had. It was awesome.
Thank you for joining us. We definitely enjoyed that conversation. You can follow us on Twitter at PWNAPod, and you can also join us on Facebook for further discussions on this topic as well as previous topics. It's www.facebook.com/bcpastor. And I want to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas. Tune in next week for another episode.